You have got to be kidding me. The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, cut through the quiet hum of the parachute rigging facility. Lieutenant Davies, fresh from Annapolis and still carrying the scent of academy polish, stood with his hands on his hips, a look of profound disbelief on his face. He gestured vaguely at a neatly packed parachute, then looked directly at the man who had packed it. I said I want a 2-inch margin on the log stitch, not a 2 1/4. Are you even listening to the morning briefs, or are you just here to collect a paycheck? Glenn Patterson, who had been on this earth for 73 years, 60 of which had been in service to his country in one form or another, slowly finished his sip of black coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades. He placed it down with a quiet thud. He didn't look at the lieutenant. His gaze was fixed on the vast expanse of nylon and cordage spread across his packing table, a life-saving puzzle he'd solved thousands of times. His hands, gnarled with age but still possessing a surgeon's steadiness, rested on the table. He remained silent, a rock in the stream of the young officer's tirade. The other riggers, a mix of civilian contractors and junior enlisted sailors, pretended to be busy, the sudden tension in the room as thick as the coastal humidity. Davies took the silence as defiance. I'm talking to you, old man. This is a SEAL team. We demand perfection. A 1/4 inch could be the difference between a clean insertion and a catastrophic failure. Do you understand the stakes here? His voice rose, each word a small shove, an attempt to provoke a reaction from the quiet figure before him. The young lieutenant's face was turning a shade of crimson that clashed with his crisp white uniform. The silence from Glenn Patterson seemed to fuel his frustration, twisting it into a more personal, more venomous attack. He stepped closer, invading Glenn's personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, demeaning tone that was somehow louder than his previous shouting. Look at you, you're ancient. How did you even get this contract? Did you wander in off the street? This isn't a retirement home. This is the bleeding edge of naval special warfare. The men who use this equipment are warriors, the best of the best. They deserve to have their gear packed by professionals who can still see straight, not by some relic who should be in a rocking chair. A few of the younger sailors shuffled their feet uncomfortably. They knew the lieutenant was out of line, but he was still an officer, and they were at the bottom of the long, unforgiving chain of command. The older contractors, men who had known Glenn for years, exchanged dark looks, their hands tightening on their rigging tools. They'd seen this before. New officers, full of theoretical knowledge from the academy but with zero practical experience, would often mistake Glenn's quiet demeanor for incompetence. They saw an old man, slow and methodical, and failed to see the lifetime of experience that guided his every move. Davies wasn't finished. He picked up Glenn's logbook, flipping through the pages with a dismissive flick of his thumb. Each entry was a model of precision, written in a neat block script that hadn't changed in 50 years. I'm going to be reviewing all your recent packs, Davies announced to the room, as if he were a detective who had just cracked a major case. Every single one. Starting now. If I find so much as a single thread out of place, I'll have your contract terminated and your access to this base revoked, permanently. He tossed the logbook back onto the table, where it slid across the polished surface and knocked over Glenn's old thermos. Hot, black coffee pooled across the table, creeping towards the pristine orange parachute canopy. Before the liquid could touch the fabric, Glenn's hand shot out with a speed that defied his age. He snatched the thermos, his movements economical and precise. Not a single drop touched the chute. He calmly took a rag from his pocket and began wiping up the spill, his expression unreadable. This infuriating calm was the final straw for Lieutenant Davies. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. He was trying to assert his authority, but the old man's placid refusal to be baited was making him look foolish. He needed to escalate, to find a weakness, to prove he was in charge. His eyes scanned Glenn, looking for any flaw to latch onto, and then he saw it, a faded patch of ink, barely visible above the collar of Glenn's work shirt. What is that? Davies sneered, pointing a finger at Glenn's neck. Some kind of jailhouse tattoo. You get that on a drunken Liberty call back in the Stone Age? He laughed, a short, ugly bark. Let me guess, an anchor? A pin-up girl? Something to remember a cheap port and a bad decision? The lieutenant leaned in closer, a cruel smirk spreading across his face as he tried to get a better look. That tattoo. Glenn hadn't consciously thought about it in years, but the officer's venomous words brought the memory of the needle crashing back. It wasn't a needle in a sterile modern parlor. It was a makeshift rig, a guitar string attached to a small motor, powered by a stolen battery. The ink was a mixture of pen ink and ash, sterilized with a splash of cheap whiskey. He wasn't in a port. He was in the cramped, suffocating confines of a submarine's torpedo room, deep beneath the cold black waters of the North Atlantic. The man holding the needle was his brother, not by blood but by a bond forged in chaos and shared risk. They were just boys then, part of a new experimental unit, about to be launched from the torpedo tubes on a mission that had never been attempted. They all got the same tattoo that night, a small cryptic symbol on their necks, a trident. It was a mark of their silent pact, a promise that no matter what happened in the crushing deep or the frozen land that awaited them, they were in it together. It was a symbol of a warrior class that back then didn't even officially exist. The sting of that makeshift needle, the low hum of the sub's machinery, the shared look of grim resolve in his friend's eyes. It all came back in a flash, a secret history etched into his skin that this arrogant boy could never comprehend. Across the cavernous room, Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Romano, a grizzled veteran rigger with a chest full of his own ribbons, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of dread. He had been a rigger for 25 years and had worked alongside Glenn Patterson for the last 5. He knew Glenn not just as a master of his craft, but as a man who radiated a quiet, unshakable authority that had nothing to do with the rank on his collar. Romano had seen officers like Davies before, and he knew this was escalating beyond a simple workplace dispute. Davies wasn't just disrespecting a civilian contractor, he was violating one of the Navy's most sacred, unspoken rules. You respect your elders. You honor the quiet professionals who have forgotten more about your job than you will ever know. When Davies pointed at the tattoo on Glenn's neck, Romano felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen that faded ink before. He didn't know its specific origin, but he knew it was old school. It was from a different era of the teams, a time before the high-tech gear and the public accolades. It was a marker of the pioneers, the quiet, shadowy figures who had written the book on naval special warfare. Davies was dancing on a landmine and had no idea. Romano couldn't intervene directly without making the situation worse for himself and for Glenn, but he could not let it continue. This was an offense not just against a good man but against the very ethos of the community. He set down his tools with deliberate care, his movements slow and casual. He caught the eye of another senior contractor and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent signal to stay put and not escalate. He then turned and walked towards the back offices, his gait unhurried. He didn't want to draw Davies' attention. He entered a small, cluttered supply office and quietly closed the door. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his thumb flying across the screen. He didn't call the base security or the department head. He knew that would just mire the situation in bureaucracy. He needed someone who would understand the gravity of what was happening, someone who understood the history and the personalities involved. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he was looking for, the direct line to the office of the base commander, Captain Reynolds. He hesitated for only a second before pressing the call button. The commander's aide, a sharp young ensign, answered on the second ring. Captain Reynolds' office. "This is Senior Chief Romano at the rigging facility," Mike said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with the captain. It's an emergency." There was a pause on the other end. "The captain is in a secure brief, Senior Chief. Can I take a message?" "With all due respect, Ensign, this can't wait for a message. Tell him it concerns a civilian rigger named Glenn Patterson." Romano paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Tell him one of the new lieutenants is publicly berating Mr. Patterson on the packing floor. Tell him the lieutenant just made an issue of the old trident tattoo on Mr. Patterson's neck." The ensign on the other end of the line was silent for a moment. Romano could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks. Then the ensign's voice returned, the professional calm replaced by a new note of alarm. "Stand by, Senior Chief." Inside the soundproof conference room, Captain James Reynolds was in the middle of a top-secret satellite briefing on fleet movements in the South China Sea. He was a man accustomed to immense pressure, a leader who had commanded men in the harshest environments on the planet. His focus was absolute. That focus was shattered when his aide slipped into the room and placed a note in front of him, a breach of protocol that was almost unheard of. Reynolds glanced down, his eyes scanning the brief handwritten message. "Urgent, Misjudged Romano, at rigging facility. Lt. Davies confronting civilian Glenn Patterson, made issue of neck tattoo." The captain's blood ran cold. The other officers in the room watched in confusion as the color drained from their commander's face. He stared at the note for a full 10 seconds, the name Glenn Patterson seeming to leap off the page. He pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the polished floor. "Gentlemen, this briefing is over," he announced, his voice a low growl that promised imminent and severe consequences for someone. "I have a situation to attend to." He was on his feet and moving towards the door before his subordinates could even process the dismissal. He burst out of the conference room, his aide nearly having to run to keep up. "Get my vehicle to the front entrance." "Now," Reynolds barked, "and get Master Chief Thorne. Tell him to meet me there a minute ago." The captain didn't wait for a reply. He was already striding down the hallway, his mind racing. Glenn Patterson. Of all the people on his base, he was perhaps the one man who deserved nothing but the utmost respect. The one man whose quiet presence was a living link to the very origins of the Brotherhood. Reynolds now led, and some wet behind-the-ears lieutenant was harassing him. On his watch. It was unthinkable. It was a sacrilege. Back on the rigging floor, Lieutenant Davies was basking in what he perceived as his victory. Glenn's continued silence, and the nervous energy of the onlookers had convinced him that he had successfully asserted his dominance. He felt powerful, in control. To cement his authority, he decided it was time for the final humiliating blow. He pulled out his official notepad, clicking his pen with an obnoxious flourish. "All right, that's it. I'm writing you up, Patterson," he declared, his voice full of mock authority. Insubordination, failure to follow protocol, and frankly a demonstrated inability to perform your duties to the standards required by naval special warfare. He looked up from his pad, a smug grin on his face. "I'm recommending your immediate termination and a full review of your security clearance. I'm not even sure how you got it in the first place." He took a step towards Glenn and reached out, intending to snatch the contractor ID clipped to Glenn's shirt. "Give me your badge. You are officially relieved of your duties. I will personally escort you to the gate." This was the ultimate overreach. A junior officer attempting to fire and physically remove a senior civilian employee, a gross abuse of his limited authority. The first sound was a distant siren, a faint wail that grew steadily louder, closer. Then came the screech of tires on pavement, a sound that did not belong in the quiet, orderly world of the naval base. The wide bay doors of the rigging facility were thrown open, and a black command vehicle skidded to a halt just outside, its lights flashing. It was followed by 2 security trucks, which boxed in the entrance. The entire facility froze. Conversation stopped. Work ceased. Everyone turned to stare as the doors of the command vehicle flew open. Out stepped Captain Reynolds, his face a mask of cold fury. He was followed by the highest-ranking enlisted man on the entire base, Fleet Master Chief Thorne, a man whose steely gaze could make colonels tremble. They moved with a purpose that scattered sailors out of their path. Their eyes scanned the room, ignoring everyone until they locked onto the scene at Glenn Patterson's workstation. They saw the young lieutenant, his hand still outstretched towards the old man's chest, a look of utter confusion on his face. They saw Glenn, standing as still and as solid as an ancient oak tree, his expression unbothered. The spectacle of the sudden high-level arrival was stunning, a full-force display of command authority that the facility had never witnessed. Captain Reynolds strode across the polished concrete floor, his boots echoing in the now deafening silence. He walked right past Lieutenant Davies as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed solely on Glenn Patterson. He stopped 3 feet in front of Glenn, his back ramrod straight. The entire room held its breath. Then something extraordinary happened. Captain Reynolds, the commander of the entire naval base, a man who held the careers and lives of thousands in his hands, snapped his heels together and brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Master Chief Patterson," Reynolds said, his voice ringing with a deep and profound respect that stunned every single person present. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir." The title hung in the air. Master Chief, not a contractor, not an old man, a Master Chief. Davies's face went white. He dropped his hand as if it had been burned. Master Chief Thorne moved to stand beside his captain, and he too rendered a salute, his gaze locked on Glenn. Reynolds held his salute, waiting. After a moment, Glenn slowly, almost reluctantly, raised his eyes from the parachute on his table and met the captain's gaze. He gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Reynolds finally dropped his hand. He turned to face the assembled crowd of riggers and sailors, his eyes blazing. "For those of you who do not know," the captain began, his voice a low, controlled roar. "This man, Mr. Glenn Patterson, is not just a parachute rigger. This is Master Chief Petty Officer Glenn Patterson, retired. He was one of the founding members of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. You call it SEAL Team 6. A collective gasp went through the room. The name was legendary, a unit spoken of only in hushed, reverent tones. Davies looked like he was going to be physically ill. Reynolds continued, his voice like rolling thunder, reciting a history that had been sealed in classified documents for decades. Master Chief Patterson served 30 years in the teams. He was a pioneer of high-altitude, low-opening parachute techniques, the very techniques you all use today. He conducted operations in every hellhole this world has to offer, long before any of you were born. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross for his actions during Operation Eagle Claw. He has 2 silver stars and 5 bronze stars for valor. The tattoo on his neck that was so casually mocked today is a plank owner's trident, a mark given only to the original members of DevGRU, a band of brothers who defined what it means to be a Tier 1 operator. He doesn't work here for the money. He works here because he made a promise to the men he lost that he would spend his life making sure that every single parachute that goes out that door is perfect. He has dedicated his life to protecting the men who follow in his footsteps. Reynolds paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon the trembling Lieutenant Davies. "This man," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "is a living legend, and he is to be afforded the respect that he has earned 1,000 times over." The captain's gaze remained locked on Lieutenant Davies, a predator fixing its eyes on its prey. The young officer was visibly shaking, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. "Lieutenant," Captain Reynolds began, his voice deceptively calm, "you are an officer in the United States Navy. You hold the President's commission. You are entrusted with the leadership and welfare of sailors and the solemn duty to uphold the honor of this uniform." He took a step closer. "And you just used your authority to belittle and threaten a man whose boots you are not worthy to polish. You did not see a Master Chief. You did not see a hero. You saw an old man, and in your arrogance and your ignorance, you decided he was worthless. You have not only failed as a leader, you have failed as a man. You have brought shame upon this command and upon your commission." He turned to Master Chief Thorne. "Master Chief, escort this officer to my office. He will wait there for me. His career in naval special warfare is over." Thorne nodded grimly and gestured for Davies to move. The lieutenant, utterly broken, turned and walked away like a man in a trance. As the small group departed, a heavy silence returned to the room. Glenn Patterson finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the cavernous space. "Captain," he said, not with anger but with a weary sadness. "The boy is young, he's full of fire, but his sights are off." Reynolds turned back to Glenn, his expression softening. "He made a mistake, Master Chief, a big one." Glenn nodded slowly, picking up the rag and giving the table one last wipe. "We've all made mistakes, Captain. The important thing is whether we learn from them. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Maybe this will be his fire. Teach him, don't just break him." It was a lesson delivered with grace and humility, from a man who had seen true hardship and had no need for vengeance. As Glenn spoke, the image of that needle flashed in his mind again, but this time the memory was clearer. He saw the faces of the other young men in that torpedo room, all of them impossibly young, all of them scared but unwilling to show it. The tattoo wasn't a mark of bravado. It was a physical manifestation of a promise. It was a reminder of their shared vulnerability and their absolute reliance on one another. The man who had wielded the needle, a teammate named Marcus, had looked him in the eye and said, "No matter what, we go together. We come back together." Marcus hadn't come back from that mission. None of them had been forged in fire. They had been consumed by it. Glenn's life, his quiet work at this table, was a tribute to that promise. He was still here, ensuring the next generation came back together. The fallout for Lieutenant Davies was swift and decisive. He was formally reassigned to a dreary desk job at a remote logistics command in the Aleutian Islands, a place known as a career graveyard. A letter of reprimand was permanently placed in his file, ensuring he would never be promoted again. But Captain Reynolds took Glenn's words to heart. Before Davies was transferred, he was ordered to attend a new training program that was immediately implemented on the base, a mandatory seminar for all junior officers on the history of the SEAL teams, with a special focus on the contributions of its veterans and the importance of respecting the civilian support staff. Weeks later, Glenn was at a small off-base coffee shop, reading a newspaper. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked a subdued-looking Davies, now dressed in civilian clothes. He saw Glenn, hesitated for a moment, then walked over to his table. "Sir," he began, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former arrogance. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong." Glenn slowly folded his newspaper and looked up at the young man. He saw not an arrogant officer but a chastened one, a man who had perhaps begun his journey through the fire. "Have a seat, son," Glenn said, gesturing to the empty chair. Davies sat down, and for the next hour Glenn Patterson, the quiet hero, talked to him. He didn't talk about war or secret missions. He talked about service, about humility, and about the quiet dignity of a life spent in dedication to others. Stories like Glenn's are a powerful reminder that heroes are all around us, often hidden in plain sight. The quiet professional, the unassuming elder, the person you might overlook, may have a history you could never imagine. To ensure we continue to bring you these stories of valor and honor, the legacies of men like Master Chief Patterson, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Veteran Valor, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.